Empty of what? Buddhism's answer. There is a word in Buddhism that has caused confusion for over 2,000 years. Emptiness. When people hear this word, they often react with unease. It sounds cold and dark, like nothing exists, nothing is real, nothing matters. If that were the Buddha's teaching, why did he spend 45 years traveling and speaking? If his message was simply, nothing exists, one sentence would have been enough. But that is not what he meant. The confusion comes from asking the wrong question. For centuries, people have asked, does emptiness mean things exist or not? This question creates a trap. The human mind wants clear answers. Yes or no. Real or not real. We want something solid to hold on to. But the Buddha was pointing to something that cannot be captured by yes or no. In the Sunyata Sutta, Ananda asked the Buddha a careful question. It is said that the world is empty. In what way is the world empty? Notice, he did not ask whether the world is empty. He asked in what way. The Buddha answered, the world is empty. Empty of self and what belongs to self. This changes everything. Not empty meaning nothing is there. Empty of something specific. Empty of a self that exists on its own, and empty of anything that truly belongs to such a self. What does the world mean here? The Loka Sutta explains, the world is not some faraway universe. The world is what you experience right now, eyes and what you see, ears and what you hear, nose and what you smell, tongue and what you taste, body and what you touch, mind and what you think. This is your world. And this world, the Buddha says, is empty of self. But if everything is empty of self, does that mean nothing is real? Does nothing matter? The Buddha answered this in the 𝐂𝐴𝐻𝐸𝐺𝐸 Sutta. All exists. One extreme. All doesn't exist. The second extreme. He refused both answers. Instead, he pointed to dependent origination. Things appear when causes come together, and they disappear when those causes fall apart. This is not the solid existence we usually imagine, but it is not nothingness either. It is something in between. This is the middle way, not a compromise, a completely different way of seeing. One more thing. This teaching does not belong to just one Buddhist tradition. The early teachings and the later philosophies point to the same truth. They just explain it in different ways. The Nikaya tradition focuses on direct practice. You watch your own experience in meditation until the sense of I becomes lighter and thinner. The Madhyamaka tradition, developed later by Nagarjuna, focuses on logic. It examines everything carefully and shows that nothing has an independent essence. These are not enemies. They are different doors into the same room. But before we go deeper, we need to understand the foundation. And the foundation is this: the self you think you are. It is not what you imagine. Let us start with something you know very well, the feeling of being me. Right now, as you read these words, there is a sense that someone is here, someone reading, someone thinking. This someone feels like it has always been here, the same me from this morning, from 10 years ago, from childhood. But is this true? The Buddha examined this question just days after his awakening. He gathered his first 5 students and gave the teaching recorded as the Anattalakkhana Sutta. It was only his second talk, and it went straight to the heart. He started by looking at what we are made of, the 5 aggregates. Form, the physical body. Feeling, whether each experience is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Perception, how the mind recognizes and names things. Mental formations, our intentions, reactions, and habits. Consciousness, the knowing quality that is aware of all this. The Buddha examined each one. Is form permanent or impermanent? The students answered, impermanent. And what is impermanent? Does it bring lasting happiness? No. Then he asked the key question. What is impermanent and cannot bring lasting happiness? Does it make sense to call that me or mine? The answer was no. He asked the same questions about feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Each time, the same answer. Nothing in this collection of changing parts is solid enough to be called I. The Buddha did not teach with abstract ideas. He used images. In the Phenapindupama Sutta, he gave these examples. Form is like foam on a river. It looks solid, but grab it, and there is nothing to hold. Feeling is like a bubble on water. It appears, shines for a moment, then pops. Perception is like a mirage. You see water on a hot road, but when you get there, it is just dry ground. Mental formations are like a banana tree. You peel layer after layer looking for the center, but there is no center, just more layers. Consciousness is like a magic trick. It seems so real while it happens, but it depends completely on the right setup. These images do not mean nothing exists. They describe how things exist. Always moving, always depending on other things, with no permanent core. Why does this matter? Because if there were a permanent self at your center, you would be stuck with whatever that self is. Anxious, broken, limited, forever. But if the self is more like a river than a rock, then change is possible. What you were is not what you must be. The Buddha also taught how to see this directly. In the Sunyata Sutta, he described a meditation method. Empty of what is not there. What remains, he understands. This is present. This is not about denying experience. It is about seeing clearly what is actually there and what is not. In deep meditation, you may notice that things you thought were part of you, the constant mental talk, the stories about yourself, the sense of someone watching, can become quiet. Experience continues. Awareness continues. But the owner of that awareness cannot be found. Some people say early Buddhism only talked about the self, not about the world. But this is not quite right. Look again at the Loka Sutta. When the Buddha said the world is empty, he meant the whole field of experience. Everything you see, hear, think, and feel. The early tradition kept the teaching simple and practical. The goal was freedom from suffering, not winning arguments. But as Buddhism grew, more questions came up. What about objects? What about time and space? What about the Buddha's own words? This leads us to the second layer. We have seen that no solid self sits at the center of experience. But what about everything else? Trees, mountains, other people, thoughts, emotions. Do these have some essence of their own? Something that makes them what they are, separate from everything else? The Madhyamaka tradition answers this question. It takes the insight of no self in persons and extends it to everything. The key word is svabhava, often translated as inherent nature or own being. Svabhava would mean an essence inside a thing that makes it what it is, all by itself, not depending on anything else. If a cup had svabhava, it would be a cup on its own, not depending on the clay, the potter, or the person who uses it. Nagarjuna's point is simple. Nothing has this kind of independent existence. Not the cup, not the clay, not atoms, not space, not time. Everything that exists because of other things. And what depends on other things cannot have its own separate essence. This is not saying the world is fake. It is describing how the world works. Through connection, through relationship. Everything touches everything else. Nothing stands alone. A world of separate essences would be frozen and dead. The world we live in moves, grows, and changes. This is possible exactly because nothing is sealed off from everything else. The Heart Sutra puts it simply. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. This sounds strange at first, but the meaning is clear when you understand. Form, whatever you can see or touch, does not exist on its own. It comes from other things and depends on other things. And emptiness is not a void hiding behind form. Emptiness is simply the way form exists, dependent, connected, without a separate core. Nagarjuna said it this way in Mulamadhyamakakarika. Whatever is dependently co-arisen, emptiness, a dependent designation, the middle way. 4 words pointing to one truth. Things arise depending on other things. This means they have no separate essence. This means the names we give them are useful labels, not ultimate truths. And seeing all this clearly is the middle way. Why did this detailed teaching develop? As Buddhism spread, it met other schools that said, okay, persons have no self, but the basic building blocks of reality do have their own nature. Nagarjuna saw this as a mistake. If you accept inherent nature at any level, you have not fully understood emptiness. You have just moved the problem somewhere else. But this raises a worry. If nothing has its own nature, does anything matter? Is everything just illusion? The tradition answered with the 2 truths. Conventional truth, samvrti satya, is the level where things work. You plant seeds, trees grow. You help someone, they feel better. You hurt someone, they suffer. This is real. This is how life works. Ultimate truth, paramartha satya, is the recognition that nothing in conventional life has a separate, independent essence. Trees, seeds, help, harm, none of them exist on their own. These 2 truths do not fight each other. Conventional truth is how ultimate truth shows up in daily life. A rainbow has no separate essence. It is just light passing through water drops. But you can still see it, point at it, enjoy it. It is both empty and present. This gives us balance. Because things depend on causes, we do not fall into thinking nothing matters. Actions have results. The path leads somewhere. Because nothing has a separate essence, we do not fall into thinking things are stuck forever. Everything can change. Even the deepest problem is not permanent. So we have 2 layers now. First, no solid self at the center. Second, no separate essence in anything at all. There is one more layer, maybe the most important. If you have followed this far, you might feel some satisfaction. You understand that the self is a process, not a thing. You understand that nothing has a separate essence. You have a clear picture. That clear picture is exactly where the danger is. Understanding emptiness can become another thing to hold on to. A belief, an identity, a badge. And anything you hold on to becomes a limit. Nagarjuna gave a strong warning. in 𝐂𝐮𝐬𝐬𝐞𝐥, emptiness, forsaking of all views. Those who view emptiness are incurable. The Buddhas taught emptiness for one reason: to help people let go of all positions, all beliefs, all mental gripping. But if you take emptiness and turn it into a position, I believe everything is empty, I understand the real truth, you have missed the point. You have turned the medicine into a new disease. And for this disease, Nagarjuna says, there is no cure. This is the subtlest trap. You can let go of money, status, pleasure. You can see through the sense of a separate self. You can understand that nothing has its own essence. But one thing remains hidden: attachment to the teaching itself. The Buddha saw this from the beginning. In the Alagādhapāma Sutta, he gave the example of a raft. I have taught as a raft for crossing over, not for holding on. A traveler needs to cross a river. No bridge in sight. So he gathers logs, ties them together, and paddles across. When he reaches the other side, does he carry the raft on his back through the forest? Of course not. The raft did its job. He leaves it behind. The teachings are like that raft. They help you cross from confusion to clarity. They are not meant to be carried forever. The Diamond Sutra says the same thing. The Dharma I speak is like a raft. Even dharmas should be relinquished. Non-dharmas. Even correct teachings should be let go. Wrong views, yes. But right views too. Because holding on to right views turns them into obstacles. What remains after both are released is not a view at all. Then comes the instruction that cuts through everything. They should give rise to a mind which does not dwell. A mind that does not land anywhere. Not on existence, not on non-existence, not on emptiness, not on non-emptiness. The mind wants to rest somewhere. But every resting place becomes a limit. Real freedom is not needing a place to stand. Here, the later tradition meets the earliest teachings again. Early Buddhism said, do not cling to views. Madhyamaka says, do not cling even to emptiness. Different words, same freedom. Zen says it bluntly, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha. Shocking words. But the meaning is simple. If you turn the Buddha into a concept, an idol, something to grasp, that is not the Buddha. The living truth cannot be held. What remains when emptiness itself is released? Words cannot really say. Anything we say becomes a concept. Concepts can be grasped. What remains when grasping stops does not fit into sentences. We can only say what it is not. It is not the belief that nothing matters. It is not the belief in permanent things. It is not a position to defend. It is not blankness. Experience still happens. Some call it suchness. Things as they are, before the mind adds anything. But even that word can become something to hold. The honest thing is to stop collecting words. 3 layers have been explored. The self, looked at closely, is a process without a permanent center. Every phenomenon, looked at closely, depends on other things and has no separate core. Even the insight of emptiness, if held too tightly, becomes one more obstacle. Now what? If you walk away with just more information, another philosophy filed away. Something important has been missed. The Buddha did not teach emptiness for intellectual reasons. He taught it because he saw that holding on is the root of suffering. Emptiness is what makes letting go possible. When the grip loosens, suffering loses its power. This has real effects in life. Think about how much energy goes into defending an image of yourself, worrying about what others think, replaying old hurts, planning for threats that may never come. All this assumes something solid that needs protection. See that the solid thing is not really there, and the defensive effort becomes lighter. Not because you stop caring, because there is less to guard. Think about how we treat situations as fixed. This problem is hopeless. That person will never change. My life is ruined. Each of these assumes a permanent nature. Notice that every situation is a gathering of causes, all of them moving, and the verdict becomes less final. Not because you ignore difficulty, because difficulty is not destiny. Think about the pride in holding correct views. I understand. Others do not. Understanding quietly becomes identity. Identity needs defense. Notice the hardening, and understanding can stay useful without becoming armor. The 𝐂𝐮𝐬𝐞𝐧𝐭 Sutta describes emptiness as something to dwell in, not a concept to hold, but a way of being. Meeting each moment without adding what is not there, without creating a watcher behind the watching, without stamping events as permanent. Every story you carry about yourself, not good enough, unlovable, always failing, is a pattern. Patterns form through causes. Causes change. No story has a lock on you. It never did. And here is the quiet truth. The teaching that denies separate essence also denies permanent limitation. If nothing has a fixed core, nothing is beyond change. What looks like a cage is made of the same moving threads as everything else. The bars are not iron. They are just continuity mistaken for permanence. This does not make life weightless. Actions still matter. Kindness still helps. Cruelty still harms. The absence of separate essence does not cancel cause and effect. It is exactly what allows cause and effect to work. In a world of sealed-off things, nothing could touch anything else. In a world of dependent arising, everything connects. The Buddha's last words, according to tradition, were simple. All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with diligence. Impermanence is not sad news. It is an opening. Because nothing is frozen, movement is possible. Because nothing is locked, release is possible. The door was never shut. Strive on with diligence, not as burden, but as invitation. When you see where suffering comes from and how it fades, effort flows naturally. You do not need to be forced. You move the way you pull your hand from heat once you feel it burning. Emptiness is not a vacancy to fear. It is the space in which everything moves. It was never absent. It just went unnoticed because attention was busy, guarding a self, fixing events, collecting views. Notice it now. Something relaxes. Not because you gained something new, because you set down what you did not know you were carrying.